Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, March 6th, 2023. Time for another show. Let's go. I'm very excited that you can hear it in my voice. The anticipation is building as I try and figure out exactly what we'll be discussing today. Okay. So we're ready to go. What's going on here today? Oh, I should be checking around, of course. I was poking around the old internets looking for interesting stories, and I found some interesting, I guess, meta stories. I suppose we can share all of those things. Greg, of course, building his collection, his raft o' stories, and everything, all is well with the world in that respect. I missed most of the news again this weekend. My head and the rest of me was elsewhere with late season college visitations going on, and getting towards decision times, college admissions coming in, going to admitted students days, etc., etc. So still a little bit of a time crunch on the weekends here. But let's see, I imagine most of our stories will probably stem from CPAC, as most of the commentary stems from reaction to CPAC. And let's see, as a matter of fact, Justice usually gives us some hints about what's trending in his view in the morning, and he makes mention of CPAC as well. It says, if Trump won a CPAC straw poll of hired actors, wouldn't that be a straw man? Okay, good question. And let's see, what else? MTG, Murdery Trader Green, in the news as well. Let's see, wants to designate Tupperware parties as a terrorist organization. We'll have to find out exactly what that's all about as we sift through the flotsam and jetsam of the news landscape, or I guess seascape if we're talking about flotsam and jetsam, and see what's been going on. And I'm just sort of glancing around, looking at what's on the front page over at Daily Kos, and nice, intriguing entry by Hunter here. A Ukraine update. Russia is inviting the pro-Putin American right to come join them. That's been going on for some time, of course. But this notes as well in parentheses, but BYO toilet. Like, okay. Well, they may not be entirely ready to absorb you into their ranks, apparently, but we'll see what some of those things are perhaps about. And like I said, as we make our tour around the I guess CPAC dominated universe for this morning. Okay, let's see. Let me see. I got to move some other items around, make some space on the desktop to be able to check in on what's happening on ye old KITM hashtag as well. And might as well have Greg right in, because I'm still pressing buttons trying to bring up other screens that'll tell me what fascinating things have been happening in the world. And we have a live human being who can do that. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. How are you?
Okay. I'm a little confused and out of it and disoriented, but that's par for the course, I think.
Well, it's Monday.
Yeah. You know,
I mean, you're supposed to feel that way on Monday.
Right, and I think I'm also supposed to like lasagna. I read this in a comic somewhere.
Well, if you're a cat, you're supposed to.
Well,
but what you really should do is concentrate on what's important, and what's important is whatever occurs to you in the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's usually how it works. That's called being the editor of a newspaper.
Exactly. And you're the editor of the show, and so you have that right.
That's right. And so CPAC, I think, I don't know. That seems to be driving most of the stories about CPAC. Nuts.
ABC okay. We're going to start, I think, with Axios.
Oh, all right. Well, why is that important?
Before we even do that, I have to just share a tweet I saw.
Yes.
Lincoln Project sent this around under the heading Awful Things That Won't Go Away. And they have trending Don Jr., 14.9 thousand tweets, and herpes, 5,000 tweets. And my physician friend Nick Mark said, well, at least Don Jr. can say he's more popular than herpes, which, just.
Yeah, but only barely.
Only barely. So Josh Krashower is trying to cover basically, and maybe we'll even get to his report, but SV Date essentially described this as a diminished Trump at a diminished CPAC.
All right.
So what happened is that over the weekend, the crazies got together, and a lot of the big names didn't show and wouldn't show. And we talked about some of the crazy stuff, and Bannon, Steve Bannon, and some of the truly crazy nuts went after Fox in a big way. They were in the position, Fox, of getting no support whatsoever, not from the right, not from the left, not from anybody, not from Democrats. And that's still part of a big story. But as far as CPAC goes, Don Jr.'s talk was so empty. He had like the first 10 rows, and then the rest of what wasn't a giant ballroom was still absolutely deserted. It was one of those 9 a.m. talks. And, the defenders were trying to say, well, people who work don't come, right? People who work don't go to CPAC.
Yeah, that's true, too.
And one of the things that CPAC is doing is they raised all their prices. Now, I remember this from Netroots Nation, and there are other professional conferences I've gone to. Other people go to different conferences and say different things. But usually what happens is you have to pay, what can be a hefty registration fee.
Yeah.
And then after that,
very often,
the things you go to might be in limited venue, like let's say Hillary Clinton's talking to a small group, but you don't pay extra for it. You just have to, hustle for tickets or limited space or get there first or whatever it is, lottery, whatever. At CPAC, there's a hefty admission fee, and then they charge you like for everything else. You want to go to Don's speech? It's going to cost you. You want to go to Trump's speech? It's going to cost you more.
Wow.
And so they've been tripling some of the prices that they pay compared to other years, and people are complaining about it. And that's one of the reasons why
that's not going to help.
It's diminished.
Attendance. Yeah, okay.
And of course, my completely ill-informed opinion, based on nothing, because it would be irresponsible not to speculate, is that Matt Schlapp is trying to scam everybody because he needs the money to defend himself.
I guess so. I don't know, who gets the money, or whether Trump gets a portion of the gate or something,
Hard to know.
But
it's all a scam, so, it's really hard to know how the
extra
scam is
admissions.
Sort of, divvy up the loot.
Right. Well, as you know, every Republican accusation is an admission, so I suppose it makes sense that they would be charging more admissions along the way. They just love admissions, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. So what Josh Krashower writes in Axios, which is free, by the way, there's no paywall there. This week's CPAC conference underscored the difficulty Republicans will have in keeping their increasingly fractured coalition together for 2024. Why it matters? Well, the Republican Party once was defined by its general ideological unity on 3 core conservative principles. Free markets, muscular foreign policy, traditional social values. And that was the pillars that were the pillars that made up the Reagan Revolution.
Okay.
But the MAGA movement
sounds like it
has moved the GOP center of gravity toward a more protectionist, populist, and belligerent outlook.
Oh.
So the whole conference was about fighting wokeness because they couldn't say the N-word, so they had to use this.
That's the only word they have left. All right. Yeah, that was a big topic, I understand.
What happened? Companies showcasing progressive values and embrace diversity came under attack, like Disney. At Gates urged defunding the FBI, CIA, and other intelligence agencies. It doesn't really sound like a Republican outfit.
No. And what did it mix? Well, I hate Disney and the FBI.
Yeah, I mean, to give you an idea how nutty they are.
And the NFL. And
venture capitalist and GOP presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy called for the FBI to be shut down and replaced with something else. Built from scratch. Replaced with what? Well, we don't know yet. Just something.
Okay. The FBJ comes next.
Yeah, I guess. What they're saying is that Trump delivered the conference's keynote address Saturday with a vengeful indictment of the GOP establishment that dominated the party before his political ascent. Warmongers, like George W. Bush, freaks, neocons, open border zealots, and fools were never going back to Paul Ryan, Karl Rove, and Jeb Bush.
Oh, wow. All right.
He then pledged to protect Social Security from any Republicans pursuing reduced benefits.
All right. So
that would be Kevin McCarthy. I mean, it's just mishmash here, right? Divide over Ukraine with Marjorie Taylor Greene against Ukraine, and Mike Pompeo and Nikki Haley for Ukraine. Asked about Haley's presidential campaign, Marjorie Taylor Greene said, I don't listen to Nikki Haley, and I don't think she's going to do very well. She's probably right about that. And in fact, I agree with her on both counts.
Yeah.
So I agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene.
There you go. Don't say you can't work with both sides.
A top Trump advisor told Axios that Ron DeSantis has Reagan Republican vulnerabilities that the former president will exploit. And Trump dominated DeSantis at the CPAC straw poll, 62-20. That's an improvement from 2022. That's because only his people could afford to go. The straw poll found 79% of CPAC attendees oppose U.S. military aid to Ukraine. And 74% don't want abortion regulated on the federal level. They just want it wiped out at every state level. That's because they figure they have a better chance of controlling the states than the feds.
Maybe. I mean, I am sure there's plenty out there. Why not both? But
so why not both? The bottom line, why not neither? Trump's campaign is prioritizing the 30% of Republicans who consider themselves Trump first Republicans and letting his rivals compete for the others.
Well, yeah.
So I'm going to get the 30, and this is from an NBC News survey saying that it's 30% or so. I'm going to get the 30. They can have the 60. I win.
Well, yeah, I mean, a fractured field, I understand where he's coming from.
Yeah, in a non-fractured field, you lose.
Yes.
And in a non-fractured field, your opponents outnumber you 2-1. I mean, I'm just saying there's some things going on here.
Yeah, and what a brilliant strategy. I'm going to go for the ones who want to pick me first. Well, don't worry about it.
To try to better understand this, I'm going to bring in pollster and author Natalie Jackson. Pollster for PRRI.
Right. Natalie, please. Come in.
Author for National Journal. This is an unlocked piece. The three Republican factions, right? Because soccer moms, security dads, and Archie Bunkers.
Yes, but transgender Archie Bunkers.
Or something, right? The three Republican factions, non-cons, normie cons, and disaffected leaners. And we'll explain all three. I've been thinking about this question for a while now. It's relatively easy to see which elected officials and Republican elites are in the return to normal camp and which aren't, like Trump isn't, and Nikki Haley is.
Yes. Okay.
It's much less clear where the potential Republican electorate sits. I've been crunching loads of survey data over the last few months, and I've generally concluded the potential Republican voters split roughly evenly into three camps. Non-cons, normie-cons, and disaffected leaners. Now, the first group, non-cons, they don't fit into most plausible definitions of normalcy. Okay. We're talking about CPAC here.
Like generally speaking. Okay.
Generally speaking, these are not
abnormal people. Abnormal.
These are non-cons because they're not really conservative. They're not really Republicans. They're chaos mongers driven by former President Trump's Make America Great Again style culture war. So these are the MAGA people. I see.
Right. All right. You've been telling us about the chaos agents forever. Yes.
Yeah, because they are.
These are mongers, however.
Well,
which is an agent.
They sell it.
Yeah.
That's what mongers do. Right? You can be a fearmonger, a fishmonger, or a chaos monger.
I'm not really sure now that I think about it. Yeah, probably, right? Yeah. Okay. Monger. I got it.
They are more distinguished by their feelings about people not like them. Immigrants, foreign influence, LGBTQ people, non-Christians, non-white, as threats than by specific policy outcomes. In fact, they don't care about policy at all. They'll change policy on a dime if their leader does.
And they're perfectly willing to be inconsistent on policy so long as it benefits them and hurts the others.
You might think of these as the fascist adjacent. It's basically personality cult.
Okay. I mean,
which is kind of funny because there's another author, John Gantz, who wrote, as I joked on Twitter, in the sense that fascism requires a charismatic leader, I think we can safely say DeSantis is not a fascist.
I mean, maybe, yeah. I don't know what he's doing.
Because he don't got the charisma. Anyway, I thought that was funny. Non-con voters overwhelmingly voted for and have strongly favorable views of Trump, naturally. Yes. And they also broadly like DeSantis, but Trump clobbered him in the polls, so we know where that's going.
Okay.
They generally say they're strong Republicans, but they're really not. In fact, none of them. In fact, a lot of them never voted prior to 2016.
That is true.
by ideologically, they identify as a mix of conservatives and moderates, and about 3/4 of them are voters. So a quarter of them are just loud people who sell stuff and go to tailgate parties at Trump rallies.
They're mongers.
But 3/4 of them actually vote. Then there's the second group. You know them, the normie-cons. They're typical conservatives, Reagan style. They're less extreme in their attitudes about threats from those different from them. Remember, we didn't especially like Reagan-style Republicans. It's just that in comparison, you'll take Mitt Romney over Ron DeSantis any day of the week that ends in Y.
I think I would.
And they have more clearly identifiable policy views on social and economic issues. They voted for Trump in similar numbers to the non-cons, and people like Romney would have the first time because he's a Republican, and then not the second time and won't thereafter. But they're less likely to say they have a favorable view of him, a sign that their support might be more of a means to an end. These Republicans identify strongly with the party and conservative ideology. Nearly 9 in 10 are voters. So even though they're roughly a third of the party, like the non-con nut jobs, right? Only 3/4 of the nut jobs vote. 9 out of 10 of the regulars do.
Okay.
So if you're going to go for a group, it looks like you're better off going for them because more of them vote.
Yes.
It's like, look, I really love what the kids are saying, but the seniors show up. Who should I campaign with, you know?
The young at heart. Perhaps.
The young at heart, exactly.
Okay.
So that's the other group, and that's who Pompeo and Haley and people like Chris Sununu in New Hampshire see as potential votes for themselves. They're wrong, but that's what they in their mind see because of those numbers.
Yes. Well, they're hammers, and everything looks like nails.
To them, right. And then there's the rest of the Republicans, disaffected leaners. Again, this is the third group, divided roughly evenly according to the surveys. And this group is a mix of center-right anti-Trumpers, those who don't pay attention.
Me, right here, yeah.
And these are the people who say on surveys they're independent, but they vote Republican.
All right, that's not me. But
right?
yes,
and there's a lot of
traditional
like
independents. Sure.
And those are the ones that I'm always talking about in terms of these are potentially persuadable. Not the first group, certainly not the second group. You're not going to get a Reagan Republican or a MAGA Republican to vote for, well, I don't know, Chris Murphy in Connecticut, for example. Not going to happen. Could Blumenthal get those votes? Maybe 3.
Yeah, right. Okay. I see what you mean.
One MAGA who just made a mistake and,
on a butterfly ballot, you do very well.
Exactly.
Okay.
But a substantial number still identify as conservative, and these people do have more moderate views on policies falling mostly in the middle range. These are the ones that you can say, look, Republicans are trying to gut Social Security, consider voting for a Democrat at least this one time, or Republicans did January 6th, consider voting for a Democrat at least until such time as the ship is righted. Notably, though, they're more likely to view Trump unfavorably than favorably.
Yes.
And a plurality did vote for Trump in 2020, and a third report not voting at all.
Oh, wow.
So, again,
the independent types,
if 3/4 of the nutcases vote and 9/10 of the traditionals vote,
right?
What was only 2/3 of this group vote.
All right.
So they're the smallest group in regard to I can count on your vote.
I see.
But they're the biggest swing group.
And the most reasonable. Because they're
in
so
some
reasonable,
regards,
you
they
can't
are
get
the most
them to
reasonable.
vote.
So, again, it's a small piece of a big pie, but by numbers, it's a third. When you're going by, well, how many of them actually vote, it's a smaller number than that.
Yeah, all right.
Right? And so who goes to CPAC? The first group, the non-cons, the Trump people, the nutcases. And then you get the occasional, normie Republican who used to go, and they're like, what happened to this place?
Yeah, I guess I would go to
Why is Nick Fuentes trying to get it?
Right, Paul Weyrich lecture or something, and what is this? This guy is actually dressed in a Nazi uniform. What's happening?
Right. And the third group, the rest of the Republicans, the disaffected leaders, they don't go. They don't go to conferences.
Yeah, sure. They sometimes don't even show up to vote. They're probably not going to
go
to
I
conferences.
should caveat all of this, she says, by saying that these categories are very murky, which is why I haven't attempted to put concrete numbers. But what I did to arrive at these groups to use factor analysis to find underlying patterns in questions about culture war. To be clear, this is one of many ways to approach the question, and the interpretation of the three groupings in the data is completely my own. So she's not trying to, trademark or copyright any of this stuff.
What?
Soccer moms, TM, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But these categories largely make sense. Non-cons are not driven by policy. Forget about policy. Don't even talk to them about policy. In fact, you're better off not talking to them at all.
Yeah. Although I suppose they might be interested in policy, like, let's get rid of.
Well, that's the thing. They're probably armed and dangerous. So
yeah.
They're driven by threats to the status quo of how power is traditionally operated in the country, and it's not a conservative framework. There was a raging debate over whether Trump himself is actually a conservative. The normie cons share some of the same goals on social issues, and they can appreciate Trump for these positions. That is to say, I'll vote for him if I think he can win, because he, if nothing else, will smite my opposition.
Yeah.
And the non-cons, the nutty cons, basically say, we want him to smite the opposition. In fact, that's part of his speech. His speech said, I am your retribution.
Yeah.
He said that at CPAC.
Did he? Oh.
Yes.
That's a big word for him. All right.
So the normie cons share some of the same goals, and they can appreciate Trump for the positions, but their focus is always on policy.
Yes.
Right? And then in the third group, there is a non-trivial number of never-Trump Republicans who typically hold more moderate policy views or have no policy views at all because they're disengaged from policy, from politics. So any national Republican candidate has to put a coalition of these three groups together. And given that the disaffected people vote at much lower rates, it's up to the non-cons and the normie cons to decide the party's standard bearer. So I always talk about talking to the third group, but they're not the ones that are really going to decide who the nominee is. I get that. In a general election, however, it matters a lot more. So I'm not trying to suggest that you try to recruit and persuade the disaffected leaners, because that'll mean we get a Chris Sununu instead of a Ron DeSantis. No, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, they won't.
The nutcases and the Reagan Republicans will decide, who the nominee is. That's their problem.
And then
I'm talking about the general election.
Right.
Well, these disaffected leaners, it's okay by me if they stay home. But if they're going to vote for our side.
Yeah. Okay. So you make sure that there's somebody who's a real turnoff to them nominated. They stay home.
Why? Okay. But if you do that, the media will yell at you and say, "Tut tut! You're trying to get one of these crazy people elected, and that's going to just backfire on you, like it did in Michigan and Arizona." Wait, what? Huh? Wait, or New Hampshire, right. Don Bull. Wait. So you're exactly right.
Ta-da! All right.
And the Democratic Party knew that.
Oh.
And they did what they did. They ignored the press, which is always a good thing to do because press are like the law and ass.
All right. Sorry, press.
Sorry,
ass.
But the fact of the matter is, they really don't know what's going on. Another thing that, came up that let's see if I could find the exact quote. But something about, not paying too much attention to what the media say. And this comes from the same John Gans piece that talked about fascism requires a charismatic leader.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Right. So he also, on a related topic, said in writing about, let's say, DeSantis versus Trump, is there a good deal of over-the-top cant and hyperbole in political life and writing? Of course. But you can't really police it. Just approach the questions in the way you think is appropriate. In fact, the rhetoric of calm down is the same as you're not feeling the moral urgency of this enough. They're both kind of insufferable public poses.
Okay.
If you think it's important to be calm and analytical, be calm and analytical. If you think it's important to warn of imminent danger, then warn of imminent danger. Being analytical and even-keeled is a disposition. It helps with intellectual clarity, but being savvy is just a pose. It imparts no actual knowledge, only the appearance of being knowledgeable. So he's doing a Jay Rosen here.
Okay.
And so most of the pundits are savvy. Chris Cillizza is savvy.
Yes.
I know that what he's doing is murder, and he really shouldn't be killing other human beings, but how many votes will it get?
It's so crazy, it just might work.
Exactly, and you know who says that all the time.
I forget who actually says it. But,
Chuck Todd.
Oh, okay. All right. Yes,
but being savvy is just opposed. It imparts no actual knowledge, only the appearance of being knowledgeable. That's why you shouldn't pay too much attention to the pundits when they say, well, who's going to win. It's way too early to know. We don't even know if Trump's going to be indicted. We don't know if Ron DeSantis is actually going to be asked by generic reporters questions that people like Joe Biden eat for breakfast. You know, you're making fun of me. Yeah, whatever. I'm eating ice cream and putting on sunglasses and ignoring you. You know, Nancy Pelosi does that very well. How does Ron DeSantis stand up to that? Does he lose his temper? Does he try to stomp on their feet in those white boots? What does he do? You know, he in the past has not responded particularly well to being challenged.
No, he's not great at that.
So, you know, how does that work? So again, unless we see all of that, you don't know what his chances are. I mean, Trump is damaged, but you don't know what his chances are. We don't know how many people are running. We don't know if he wins a split field, as you alluded to earlier, or whether or not he just wilts because he's indicted and there's too much else going on.
Yeah.
We don't know. So it's, you know, nobody should be picking winners and losers at this point. It's perfectly okay to point out what appears to be going on at the moment and what might happen later, but not to the point of I know and you don't, and I'll just share my knowledge with you.
Okay. I feel a little safer picking losers, however.
Yeah.
I can't pick
the
winners.
Losers are easy.
Yeah.
You know, Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley, you could see those in advance. Probably Kristen Noonan.
So rhetorically, we're used to saying, well, we can't be picking winners and losers at this point. Yes, we can pick losers. Winners, that's tough.
Know, Larry Maryland, whatever his name is.
Yes. Oh, he said he was not going to run. Larry Hogan. He's our hero now, I guess.
Larry Maryland is not going to run.
Larry Maryland. Tim Apple. Okay. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. A restful 2-minute break, and we're back, and I forget already. I'm so rested now, I don't even remember what we were doing.
We were talking about Larry Maryland.
Larry Maryland.
And, Senator Richard Connecticut and, some of the other notables whose name may or may not be remembered by you.
Right.
But if you remember where they're from, it works,
Norfolk. I am Norfolk.
So Larry Maryland may not run.
Yes.
We're still not sure whether Glenn Virginia will.
Right. He's
term limited, so he has nothing else to do.
Yeah, right. And there's no way. I mean, I don't think he's got any chance. I wonder if he's polled at all. Do I have any chance against either of these senators? No, not really. I don't even know if either of them are up for election when his term is over. He may have to wait. It's ill-timed or perfectly timed if we ever get rid of him this way. But, yeah, I mean, too crowded a field for president and just not enough behind him at this point.
So let's look a little bit at this John Gantz piece. I think it's sort of interesting. It's called Both Worse, Understanding DeSantis and Trump. And the thing that sparked him to write it is a piece by Damon Linker.
Damon Linker, all right. Where's that?
In the New York Times.
Oh.
which was entitled "My Fellow Liberals Are Exaggerating the Dangers of Ron DeSantis," and we got problems right away.
All right. Yeah, I heard about this one.
Right. Damon Linker isn't a liberal.
Mm-hmm.
So calling, it's like,
Right.
This is
What do you mean,
Jonathan
fellow
Tate chiding the left
Yeah.
for something they either don't do or he gets completely wrong.
Okay.
I don't know why people do that. Centrists feel like they have to do this in order to establish their credentials. Usually winds up being, doesn't usually go well for them, and that's what happened this time. In the piece, Gantz writes, Linker contends that people on the left are hyperventilating about Ron DeSantis. I mean, just because he wants to prevent bloggers from writing without registering with the government first.
Yes.
Right? Or changing the complete nature of the state Florida college system.
Yes. Or banning Disney.
Or banning Disney or going after companies and corporations that are too woke. Or, really chilling librarians in schools everywhere in Florida. Why would you hyperventilate about that? In his mind, Trump remains a more threatening figure because while conceding DeSantis is generally illiberal cast and believing he would do bad things, he thinks Trump's unstable temperament and violent inclinations make him worse.
All right, worse.
To make the unconvincing claim that a DeSantis presidency would be even worse for another 4 years of Mr. Trump, that isn't necessary and could even undercut the liberal argument. So he sets up a straw man. He calls himself a liberal, sets up a straw man, and then, wants attention.
Well, that's not unusual, but it's not good either.
Right. So he got a lot of grief for it, and then he wrote on Substack, I wrote the piece for a simple reason. I've already seen lots of liberals advancing the position that DeSantis would be just as bad or even worse than Trump, and I think this is foolish. Trump wanted to do bad things as president, but was extremely dangerous at the personal level. I mean, it's true that Trump has zero restraints.
Yes.
Okay. But to me, the only difference between DeSantis and Trump is that Trump does it because he wants to, and DeSantis does it because he thinks he can. So they both do the same thing. So what's the difference to us?
That's true. That won't make much difference if the same things are happening. And I don't know. I don't know what Damon Linker was doing with the rest of his time, but I just have the feeling that a lot of the people who would write a piece and ask for it to be titled "My Fellow Liberals Are Exaggerating the Dangers of Ron DeSantis" also spent a good portion of the Trump presidency saying, you think Trump is dangerous, wait till you find somebody who's more competent at running a government and just a little bit smarter. Then you'll really be in danger. And then they come up with Ron DeSantis, who appears to fit that bill. It's not it's not a high bar to clear, but he appears to fit that bill. And then it's like, oh, you're exaggerating the danger of that. You told me that was going to be more dangerous. I know, but I need to be counterintuitive and contrarian in order to be cool. All right. It's a little frustrating.
Right. Now, you could make the argument, and Gantz says, to a certain extent, Trump was fascist adjacent, but basically what he really was a sadist. Mm-hmm. He had a lack of ideology, represented a broad sense of wounded national pride, avenged through force. A spectacular ride, he said to his followers, in effect, with me, you're taking part in history, and he offered lots of sadistic kicks, scorning and menacing the establishment with sarcasm and mockery. Enjoyment was a big part of the equation in the case of Trump, and that's true. Part of Trump's appeal is, I'm having a good time. I like this. I get to party while I watch him beat up those other people over there.
Yeah. All right.
Those are the people that go from rally to rally to rally to rally.
Yeah.
Right? So, I think the best comparison to DeSantis, Gantz writes, and so did Linker, is to Hungarian President Viktor Orban.
Okay.
Trump's more like Putin, and DeSantis is more like Orban.
Okay.
So which of them are bad? They're both bad.
Yes,
it's a stupid argument. It's a complete straw man to set them up against each other. You don't want either one. Mm-hmm. They're both illiberal, and they don't belong, in the White House.
Right.
But, if you want to make a career of saying, well, I'm yelling at the people who picked A because I picked B, so what? Stupid.
I'll agree.
And then
with
he
that.
goes, and then that's when he started writing about savvy and its uselessness.
Okay.
He said, I actually often appreciate Linker's writing, but I have to admit this sort of punditry bugs me, and I don't think it's very productive. I think one can seriously analyze important differences between Trump and DeSantis, but the need to scold or reprimand people doesn't really do much except piss them off more. Have you ever told somebody who was upset to calm down? How does that usually go?
Yeah. Right? Okay. Designed to make things worse. And
So he says,
yeah.
this is the interesting part. There's two classic tropes of centrist punditry here. One is the real problem is silly liberals, and two, the silly liberals are going to perversely hurt their own cause by being so silly. And you could see it in the complaints about, oh, I can't believe the Democrats are paying for these ads that ultimately wound up helping them do incredibly well in the last election.
Yeah.
First of all, they were silly to put those ads up, and then they're going to hurt their own cause by being so silly. And I can't say they worked, but they certainly didn't get hurt by it.
No. All right. That is, well, yeah, it's...
So it's essentially a kind of social theater where the pundit sets himself up in the role of a sensible man as opposed to the great mass of flip-outs. That's probably what annoys me about David Brooks more than anything else, is I'm going to pose as a sensible man, a savvy sensible man at that, who will explain to you from a sensible point of view why you're all wrong and I'm right. But I'll do it nicely and genially so you can't get mad at me because I'm not really a bad person. I'm just a savvy, sensible person in the middle. And yeah, it's all social theater, and it really annoys me because, like, you miss, well, okay, I understand side A beat the crap out of side B, but let me explain in a savvy, sensible point of view, like Chris Cillizza, why this isn't what you thought it was, and ultimately, let me change the subject in my last paragraph and talk about something else entirely.
Yeah, okay. I don't know. For some reason
It's a style.
I was brought back to the column that he did about how liberal elite New Yorkers were destroying their connection to the rest of the country by enjoying fancy sandwiches.
Something like that.
You remember? I brought a friend to a deli, and I realized that she didn't know what gabagool was, And would you like to go get pizza? Golly, yes. All is well.
All is well.
All right.
So, I'll just point out again, he says, the hysterics and flip-outs have had somewhat of a better record in regard to predicting politics in the last few years, so maybe you should flip out a little bit. And so I think he's right. I think he has some insight here into how people write and how the pundits function, and that's always of interest to me. So
Right,
I
yes.
thought I'd spend a little time on it.
You have.
And
we appreciated it.
and we'll move on.
Okay.
So, timid
Well
media
done.
and
Timid.
GOP figures are again dangerously normalizing Trump, says Jennifer Rubin,
Oh, Ruben.
a
Okay.
pundit who's obviously hysterical and over the top because she's pointing out that, like, Trump is bad.
Yeah, well, got to stop that.
Apparently, neither the media nor supposedly sober Republicans have learned anything from the past. Trump gave a bonkers speech at the CPAC conference on Saturday, musing about Russia blowing up NATO headquarters, claiming President Biden had taken the border wall and put it in a hiding area, and telling the crowd, I'm your warrior, I'm your justice. And for those who have been wronged and betrayed, I am your retribution. That's a direct quote.
I alone can fix it.
So we don't get headlines acknowledging this is unhinged. Instead, we get from the New York Times, Trump says he would stay in the 2024 race if indicted, which, by the way, he did say.
Oh, well, it's newsworthy as well.
Right? ABC, former President Trump continues to reign supreme over the conservative wing of the Republican Party.
Normal
Washington
guy.
Post, Trump takes victory lap at conservative conference. Instead of, Trump gave a completely unhinged fascist speech.
Yes, and I don't know. Yeah, that's always been an issue. Oh, that's just Trump being Trump. Yeah, well, he's a fascist.
exactly
You
right.
should say so. It is
Not
Trump
everybody
being
was
Trump.
terrible
That's
at
the problem.
it. This is S.V. Adate writing in the
Right,
HuffPost,
he's
probably
good.
one of the better coverage pieces of that. Trump to his followers, I am your retribution. The coup
All right.
attempting former president brought his usual grievances back to a diminished CPAC. So just in the heading and the subheading, they pretty much get it right.
All right.
Trump, within minutes of taking the stage at the Gaylord National Resort, went into his typical remarks disparaging the United States as a filthy communist country and attacking Democrats in the news media. They're not coming after me, they're coming after you. I'm just standing in their way, he said. We'll drive the globalists out, we'll kick out the communists. I mean, this is bad stuff. Jennifer Rubin's absolutely right. And Damon Linker's crazy, but correct in saying Trump is pretty bad. You know, he's just skipping how bad DeSantis is because DeSantis is bad in a different way. But that's, it's a pretty nasty speech there.
That is.
Trump called prosecutors investigating him racist, at least the ones in New York and Georgia, right?
Sure, right, of course.
Who happen to be black.
The ones where they're going to win.
And claimed they only went after him because he's likely to win the presidency again. He continued lying about the 2020 election having been stolen from him. This is a pretty good piece. You know, this is how it should be reported.
All right.
We did much better in 2020 than we did in 2016. He added later, I won that second election and I won it by a lot. And I might add, that, it's pretty clear that the crowd at his speech was way bigger than his inauguration, which itself was 10 times bigger than Obama's.
Naturally.
Okay. He litigated at length his 2 impeachments, so the lawyers might have enjoyed this. The first for his attempted extortion of Ukraine and the second for his incitement of the January 6th assault on the Capitol. And he promised that if he won re-election, he'd take revenge on those who didn't respect his followers.
Okay. Well, that's the real reason. But yeah, you don't relitigate what you won. I mean, just as a rule, you should not be wasting your time with that. But that's how dangerous he is, I guess. Right.
I'm the only candidate who can make this promise. I will prevent, and very easily, World War III. Very easily. He's right. He would simply capitulate and give the United States over to Putin. So there'd be no World War III.
I guess there's that, or I could just go directly to World War IV.
And by the way, he said, you're going to have World War III if something doesn't happen fast.
Yes, we've been having that for weeks now, or months, years, as he's been saying, that we were totally in the middle of it, or he was preventing it, for whatever. Okay.
8 years ago, the last time CPAC was held with an approaching presidential election without a Republican incumbent, the conference attracted a full dozen aspirants. GOP consultants said the decision by likely 2024 candidates, DeSantis, Tim Scott, and others not to attend makes sense given how overtly pro-Trump CPAC has become. Indeed, on Saturday alone, speakers included Jair Bolsonaro, Mike Lindell, Carrie Lake, and Elise Stefanik, all of whom spoke glowingly about Trump.
Yeah, so, okay. So it's a Trump rally.
Yeah. Most candidates make rational political decisions based on the path to victory, said Saul Anuzis, a former chair of the Michigan Republican Party and a CPAC attendee since 1978. Trump's speech to several thousand of his fans was the closest thing to a rally he staged since announcing his candidacy.
Yeah, it did take on the feeling of rally when you talked about the speaker lineup.
Right. Trump's fundraising has been weak compared to what he was collecting during his 2020 campaign and its immediate aftermath, and rallies cost several $100,000 apiece to stage, and then he doesn't pay them.
Yes. That's true. So they don't really. But this one was on somebody else. The CPAC.
Well, that's what they cost. He doesn't pay the bills, but that's what they cost. Mm-hmm. Trump faces criminal investigations by Atlanta prosecutors and the Department of Justice for his January 6th coup attempt and his actions in the weeks leading up to that day, including his efforts to coerce Georgia officials into overturning his election loss in that state. And prosecutors are separately investigating his retention of top-secret documents in defiance of a subpoena, while the New York City District Attorney has renewed a probe into his hush money payment to a porn actor just ahead of the 2016 election. So that's a pretty darn good article. They all should read that way.
Yeah, all right. That's a fun summation of things. But hey, he's just he's battling a fractured front in the something. He's just a regular politician guy. What can you do? Yeah, that's, I guess, the way the rest of the media, at least headline writers are insisting on treating him, and for what reason, we can only guess. But I guess probably not a reason not too far removed from the one that Fox News used to justify continuing to tell election lies. It's, I don't know, our audience, we think, wants us to do it, and it's about money. Can't really be thinking it's fair. But
so, you got a choice now.
All right.
Right? This is reader's choice or listener's choice. Or listener's choice, like if
I'm listening.
It's your show. So do you want to talk about Fox News and people like Maria Bartiromo, or do you want to talk about the war in Ukraine?
Oh.
I got good stuff on both.
Let's Let's try Ukraine. I don't think we've had enough Ukraine update lately. How about that?
That's what I was thinking, and that's why I included this piece.
All right. I can read you like a list of articles that is sitting in front of my face.
Okay. This particular one is from Phillips P. O'Brien, who's a military analyst.
Ah, yeah.
In the UK, and I think he's very good.
All the time, sure.
And he's got a weekday, you got to pay for it, but weekend it's free newsletter, and this is the weekend update. It's free, and I thought it was pretty good. And he talks about the Battle of Bakhmut, but brings in a little military history too. I found it pretty fascinating.
All right.
Do you remember anything about the Battle of Bunker Hill?
Oh, yes, sure.
Right? It was us versus them. It was the colonials versus the British, who had the superior force. And a couple of notable things. Battle of Bunker Hill did not take place on Bunker Hill. It took place on Breeds Hill, nearby.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
the British were said to be the winners because they occupied the hill after taking massive casualties.
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
And so that's really his whole point when it comes to Bakhmut.
Okay.
And the commander of the Battle of Bunker Hill was a fellow named Nathaniel Greene, who this military analyst, Phillips O'Brien, says, is probably George Washington's most able commander. Now, you never heard of him because he didn't win any battles. Just like he didn't win the Battle of Bunker Hill.
Didn't win the presidency.
Which wasn't at Bunker Hill. What he did was, generally speaking, inflict so much pain on the other side that they eventually either had to withdraw, give up, or otherwise get themselves off the field.
Okay.
At a later date. So a contemporaneous question for him is, so did we win or did we lose in the Battle of Bunker Hill, which was at Breeds Hill?
Right. Well, for one thing,
and his answer was, I wish we
war.
could sell him another hill at the same price.
Okay.
Right. So what he writes is Nathaniel Greene was arguably George Washington's most able commander during the American Revolution. He's hardly known outside of military history circles, and one reason he's hardly known is he never won a famous battle.
Well, that'll hurt your PR effort.
Greene understood instinctively why Bunker Hill mattered and was not a British victory. When the results of the battle became known, he answered with the quote above, that he'd gladly sell the British another hill at the same price, and in a way he did. Though I don't have time to have too much of a historical digression here, Greene would later be sent by Washington to command colonial troops in the South, where he would lose most of the battles in such a way that he exhausted British forces in the South, led by Cornwallis, who became so worn out by Greene that they retreated northwards to Virginia. And there the British forces found themselves trapped at a place called Yorktown. And I'm sure many of you know the result there.
Yes, that's the one you're supposed to remember.
Cornwallis surrenders, right? If you remember nothing else about the Revolutionary War, remember that one. So Nathaniel Greene would have known how to understand the importance of the Battle of Bakhmut, and his understanding remains the one that matters. So O'Brien points out that the Battle of Bakhmut's been going on for a long time. And he went back and looked at his tweets and tried to figure out what's going around. And this goes back to May of 2022. So it's now March of 2023. So that's 10 months ago. Right. And he said, I ended up putting together this rather rant-like thread back then, saying it represented nothing like start of a major Russian forward offensive, that the Russians had little chance of effecting a fast-moving breakthrough in exploitation, which is what people were writing about 10 months ago. There was a place called Popasna, and they took it, and now they're going to take Bakhmut and just march forward.
All right. Yeah.
And hint on where this is going, they still haven't been able to.
Yeah, I guess not.
So he's looking at the maps then. He goes fast forward to July. It's rather jarring to see Lyman in Russian-occupied territory, but that's not where it is now. And here we are 6.5 months from that date, and the Russians have finally pressed far enough around the city that the Ukrainians seemingly have decided to pull out, except this weekend they said they're doing well enough so that they don't have to. Okay, so in many ways, the current map is extraordinary in that the Ukrainians are still in Bakhmut, and even today, it's unclear they're going to have a full withdrawal.
All right.
As of last night and this morning, the withdrawal has not occurred, And there are some indications the Ukrainians might indeed try to stay and fight, or they might leave. But whatever eventually happens, and I'm hoping at least, and in this case, there won't be the same doom and gloom reporting that there was in May. Instead, it'll be interesting to see if the reporting tries to portray the Battle of Bakhmut in its proper light, which is as a scene of mass relative destruction of forces. It might be useful to use Bakhmut to run through what really matters and what doesn't matter in the war, and basically all wars. Okay? And here's what doesn't matter. Which side occupies the physical ground at the end of the battle? See the Battle of Bunker Hill.
Yeah, I guess. Certainly if there's no important infrastructure left there, yeah.
Right? Number two, what's the political impact of the withdrawal? It doesn't matter. It's BS.
Okay.
There's no such thing, right? You ask the people and the forces what the political impact is. Look, if political impact mattered, there's a city called Kherson,
Yes.
right? Which has been in Russian hands for a long time.
Okay.
Much bigger than Bakhmut.
Yes.
The fact that the Russians took it, the political impact of that, and them having Crimea, what does it mean? Oh, it must mean, well, maybe Ukraine will surrender. No.
It has.
If the more important areas that are currently under Russian control hasn't really changed how Ukraine looks at this, hasn't changed the morale, hasn't changed their willingness to fight, why would Bakhmut? Why would a nonsense little city, and not to make fun of the people who live there, it obviously matters to them, everything matters, it's been destroyed. But from a strategic point of view, an unimportant place somehow changed the entire course of the war when the more important places haven't. That's his point.
Yeah, I mean, there's no symbolic victory in conquering Bakhmut, not inside Ukraine, certainly not outside. We don't know what it means.
Right, that's his point. There was no symbolic benefit.
I gotcha. We'll just fight you at the next city. Is all.
If anything, he says the extraordinarily wastefulness and destructiveness of the Russian campaign will hold, and reinforce Ukrainian resolve. So, from a political point of view, it doesn't matter, and from the physical ground, it doesn't matter. So, what does matter? One thing and one thing only will determine the impact of the battle: the relative losses of the two sides. There's been a huge amount of narrative reporting of the battle, with destruction and harshness. And we have almost no evidence on reliable loss calculation, except for a few days ago when Alexei Danilov, the very powerful chairman of the National Defense Council for Ukraine, said the Ukrainians have been estimating, or is he, I don't know if he's Ukrainian or Russian.
Oh.
Actually. But he said the Ukrainians have been estimating that the Russians have lost 7 soldiers for each one of their own. So if the Ukrainians are killing the Russians at a 7-to-1 ratio,
yes,
that's unsustainable for Russia.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, unless they have 500 in reserve somewhere for everyone.
Which they don't. They don't have any reserves.
Okay.
In fact, part of the problem, and he'll get to, is do you think the Russians can learn from their errors and then change the ways that they battle? They can't, because everybody who learns something then gets killed the next day.
Yes, okay, that is a problem.
Including their officers.
Right, write
so
it down.
He says, look, it's probably an overestimation to say 7-to-1. But the important thing is that the Ukrainians are asking the right strategic questions and stands in stark calculation to the Russian strategic process, which seems to be motivated by the need to take Bakhmut as a political statement.
All right.
And as a struggle for a success between Wagner forces and regular Russian army units. In other words, taking Bakhmut's become our inter-Russian armpit-sniffing contest, which, if anything, serves Ukrainian interests by motivating the Russians to suffer huger losses than they rationally would otherwise.
I gotcha.
Right? And what it says about the Russians as war fighters, the stunning thing is the Ukrainians are still in the city and seem to be debating what to do. An advanced military should be able to shut down all supply reaching the city from the one open road, which you'd think the Russians would do, but they haven't. And they can't take the city. They can only advance tiny increments a day. The fact that the Ukrainians are still debating how to leave is a sign of Russian failure. And third, what it says about the Russian grand strategy, the Kremlin, or more obviously Putin, still seems set on achieving traditional battlefield victories and taking places on a map instead of attacking the Ukrainian ability to wage war. The inability of the Russians to take Bakhmut after 6 months are a sign that Russian strategic aims are bleeding the Russian army greatly. They're losing more to take less, as I tried to explain. And that's why Nathaniel Green would totally understand what's going on here.
All right. What about the rest of us?
We will know the results relatively soon. And when we do, he says, we should look at the battle as Nathaniel Green looked at Bunker Hill in 1775. And the first thing Nathaniel Green said, hey, nobody's fighting on Bunker Hill. It's over there on Breeds Hill. Better get my butt over there.
What are you talking about? This is one of those things where you guys think July 4th was the day we issued the Declaration of Independence. It's July 2nd. Like that. It came back from the printer on the 4th.
Exactly right. So I thought that was quite helpful in terms of, again, what you're reading in the middle. They lost. Oh, last night they did this. Oh, the night before they did that. Step back, look at the big picture.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, as I guess it's you're trying to take a historical view of an ongoing contemporary battle, but not in the sense of what can we learn from history, but rather that, well, in history, you learn that things turn on the conquering of various cities or pieces of territory. Well, when the question is all settled, the historians write down, this place fell, that place fell, and of course it was more historically or more politically significant when city-states fell, because if you take Athens, you've got Athens, but if you take the Athenian suburbs, it doesn't mean very much.
Right.
So, all right, well, that's interesting, and I guess that's all they've got in Russia, where they're fighting the war by statistics. And say, well, we got to tell somebody something. So we took a city. We don't control anything, and we're no closer to eliminating Ukraine. But here's the name of a city that's in bad shape now. That's not a way to win, I guess. All right. Well, now we're updated. And we learned about Nathaniel Green. So I appreciate that.
I thought that was a pretty good piece.
Yes, excellent. Well done.
And more importantly, it took us to the end of the hour.
That is true, too. And there's lots to talk about Fox News later in the week if we want to.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks very much.
Be there.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I mean, they'll still be around and still getting sued, and that's good news. We'll have to see how much longer that trial goes on. And it's been exciting waiting. They haven't even really begun the trial phase yet. It's just discovery. Okay, well, I discovered that we're out of time. We'll see you on Wednesday.
We always have
Greg.
Proud Boys to watch.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Time to figure out what the hell to do with the other hour of the show. And as it happens, it's full of, Pocket is full of stories that we can share with you. Many of them, I think, let's see, anything... What's a good segue from this? Well, nothing's a good segue from Ukraine, really. It's sort of its own separate issue. But I guess, we'll look back on some other additional crazy from the CPAC or CPAC adjacent areas, which I think is kind of interesting. And, for instance, I don't know where this exactly came from. I don't think he was at CPAC. It's just, and I guess the fact that DeSantis isn't at CPAC might be driving perhaps some additional interest in what he is up to. He's not at CPAC. We have an explanation as to why he's not at CPAC, but I don't know. I guess that doesn't mean he's going to escape scrutiny. And this is an interesting find from Andrew Kaczynski, the K-File stuff over at CNN. Andrew Kaczynski assisted here or joined in the byline by M. Steck and Steve Contorno. And I don't know, like maybe headline of the day or something. DeSantis appointee to new Disney Oversight Board. Do you remember the whole setup for this? I'll give you the juicy part of the headline next, but you have to remember that DeSantis is at war with Disney, which is an unusual thing to be doing in general, and more unusual still as governor of Florida. But you remember that he was angry because they were too woke or something, and so blah, blah, blah. And he said, I'm going to threaten them with the power of government. And it might be whatever. It might be long overdue to put Disney out of its position that it's enjoyed there. It has a very unusual relationship with the state. It's such a powerful force and a large employer and politically powerful. And it might be that they have just parlayed their all-American image and money-making ability into an outsized influence in Florida. So in the end, we'll see whether DeSantis is right about this in terms of whether or not he can win this battle. But you'll recall perhaps hearing several months ago that one of the weapons that he hoped to use against Disney was that Disney occupied this strange position inside Florida where they had their own quasi-government, local government that ran the area of Florida, the area of Orlando that that the Disney footprint occupies, that they have their own special governance district, Reedy Creek, I think was not the name of it, the Reedy Creek district. So they have their own, tax district, and they operate essentially, Disney operates as almost as a municipal government unto itself. And, whether or not that was wise or is sustainable or is smart in any way, either from the beginning or 50 years down the road, I don't know. But at any rate, that's a special designation that gives them special rights and special flexibility, and I presume makes them considerably more money than they might otherwise make. And that's a creation of the state. And DeSantis, rightly or wrongly, says, well, that might therefore mean that it's a weapon I can use against you. If I'm angry at you and I can't change your behavior, or can I blackmail you into changing your behavior if I say I will take this creation of the state away? And he's beginning to work on that. But in so doing, of course, he can't stay away from the crazy because he himself is a ideological, wild-eyed lunatic, and the people he surrounds himself with are the same because, the whatever it is he's doing, whether it's policy or not, he's attracting lunatics. And in order to placate them and cement them as DeSantis supporters, because they're lunatics, they could just as easily become Trump supporters. But he has to reward them with position and power inside his own administration in order to cement them as DeSantis supporters. And so who are the people that are available to them? Now, Trump is already scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of craziness, but he had a national platform to do it from. And DeSantis increasingly has national reach. He can bring Chris Rufo from all the way across the country and place him in his administration this way. But, if you're in competition for scraping the bottom of the barrel with someone like Donald Trump, you're going to end up with pretty much the real dregs here. And guess what he got? So DeSantis is now filling out the new oversight board that will run Reedy Creek now that DeSantis is wresting control of the Reedy Creek district from Disney and placing it under his own direct control. So he has to populate this oversight board. And it turns out that at least one, the one we're talking about today, of the people he put on the oversight board is the kind of person who is apparently already on record in the past as saying things as sensible and scientific as tap water, if, correctly or incorrectly treated, could turn people gay. Well, that's good to know, I guess, in terms of, I'm sure some people might think, wow, my dating options are now considerably better. Tap water can turn people gay. The people I had my eye on who aren't gay, all we need to do is get them to drink water. Or I don't know what they're doing. Like, are they saying that gay people are the gay agenda? We figured out what it is finally, is to get people to hydrate. That's what this is all about. And as you know, of course, the tough, awesome, manly men are hydrating not with water, but with Gatorade and various other aids and things like Powerade and Strength Aid and America First Aid and all sorts of strong sounding aids. Whereas the water which will actually hydrate you, generally speaking, I think, much better. Well, that's because we don't want to be turned gay. So like in the old colonial times, back when people did things like mistake Breed's Hill for Bunker Hill, people stayed away from water supplies because water supplies were always a little iffy. It was never, you weren't 100% guaranteed that was sanitary. And that's why I learned that it was okay to drink beer or cider or whatever for breakfast, but that people loved the alcoholic drinks because, of course, the alcohol killed the bacteria that was in the water. It was safer to drink alcoholic beverages for breakfast than it was to drink water. But that, of course, was before we had cars, and also it was before you realized how much you were losing out by having chronic alcoholism kill you at age 60 or so, because other things would have killed you at age 60 back then anyway. So what's the difference? I don't know. How did we get to this? I don't know. Because I haven't scrolled down yet. That's the reason. Right. DeSantis appointee to new Disney Oversight Board suggested tap water could turn people gay. Not drunk, gay. An appointee to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' new oversight board in control of Disney's special tax district called homosexuality evil last year. You might have expected that he was going to. That's probably no shock at this point. And shared a baseless conspiracy theory that tap water could be making more people gay. And there is an explanation for it. I mean, it's not a good one, and it's wrong. And we know that tap water is making people wrong, but we don't know anything about them making them gay. On Monday, the Republican governor appointed Ron, I have to look closely, Perry. Is this an I or an L? Was it Pearl? No, Perry, P-E-R-I. It's difficult to tell in this typeface. He is himself an Orlando-based former pastor. That's interesting. Like, what happened to that? Like, you're a terrible pastor, we want you fired. You're a terrible person, you're touching people, we want you fired. I don't know what results in being a former pastor. Anyway, and the CEO also of The Gathering, which is a Christian ministry focused on outreach to men, which I don't really know what his motivation is. And it sounds like he's still a current pastor then. So I don't know. Anyway, unless he's also the former CEO of that. Anyway, he is also now one of the 5 people who will oversee the Reedy Creek Improvement District. And that doesn't sound like an improvement at all. The governing body that has given Disney unique powers in Central Florida for more than half a century. DeSantis signed a bill in February that allowed him to replace the district's existing board. Mostly they, of course, had been people with ties to Disney, which probably isn't great, by the way, and replace them with a 5-member body that he handpicks. The move to remove power from Disney comes nearly a year after the company spoke out against a Florida bill, which DeSantis later signed into law, to restrict certain classroom instruction about sexual orientation and gender identity. You remember the Don't Say Gay bill. A CNN K-File review of Perry's past comments found that he frequently made derogatory remarks about the LGBTQ community. No surprise, of course, but still, you got to hear it. Some of these comments include, so why are there homosexuals today? I guess he felt like there weren't any before, so how come there are so many of them around now? Well, there were always very many, and it's kind of been part of the human condition forever, and, your view of human history is wrong and warped. But okay. Well, he has an explanation for how come there are homosexuals today. There are any number of reasons, that are given. Some would say the increase in estrogen in our societies. And here's the supposed explanation. There's estrogen in the water from birth control pills. They can't get it out, Perry baselessly said in a January 2022 Zoom discussion, later put on YouTube. The level of testosterone in men broadly in America has declined by 50 points, whatever that might mean, in the last 10 years, and so maybe that's a part of it, or maybe that's entirely false and not a part of it. Well, yeah, science says it has nothing to do with reality, but I say it does, says, what's his name? What's his first name? Perry. Ron Perry. Okay. Well, he says, the big part I would suggest to you, based upon what it's saying here is the removal of constraint, he continued. So our society provided the constraint, and so, which is the responsibility of a society, to constrain people from doing evil. Well, you remove the constraints, and then evil occurs. So maybe it's birth control pills in the water for some reason. By the way, you're supposed to, take those orally, not flush them down the toilet. So if that's why you have 19 kids and counting, let me just tell you what you're supposed to be doing with it. But apparently that's the belief. Well, there's so much estrogen in the water that it's making people want to be gay. But then our society used to tell them, no, but don't be. And then they used to listen. But now, estrogen in the water, and we don't tell people no anymore. And so now they're saying, I can finally give in to the water, what the water has been telling me to do this whole time, which is to be gay. Thank God. And that sounds like a terrible explanation, and maybe one that doesn't have any basis in reality at all, and he's a crazy lunatic. But now he's governing the Reedy Creek Improvement District, which, that might not matter very much. Maybe I don't care a great deal about whether or not that damages Disney. I don't know. Maybe it does matter for Disney shareholders, and they'll be upset. But, well, let's see. We'll see what sort of effect he has on the Reedy Creek Improvement District. Maybe he's worried about showing up to the meetings, because if you've ever seen one of those governmental bodies meeting at any point, they usually sit around some sort of table or in a dais, sometimes a curved dais, and they got the little microphones and everything. And have you ever noticed, you look really close at each seat, they have, of course, the little nameplate that tells you who that person is. But right next to that nameplate, very often, and right up there near the microphone is what? What do you usually see? A pitcher of tap water. That's right. They're turning entire governmental bodies gay every time they meet. And it's out of hand. It's out of control. And I'm wondering, does that guy bring bottled water? Does bottled water have that in there too? I don't know. They can't get it out, right? And a lot of bottled water is just filtered water. It's not spring water. And I mean, if it gets into the groundwater, there's estrogen in the bottled water too. And by the way, what do you think they make Powerade with anyway? And I don't know. It doesn't really have anything to do with it. I wonder what this guy drinks. It's just sort of in a manly way. What's a good manly drink to drink? All right. Well, maybe it's cider and beer. He's an originalist. I'm not an alcoholic. I'm an originalist. Try that excuse. Okay. Well, yes, I'm driving under the influence. The influence of our founders. Well, see if it works in court. I suggest you should give it a shot. Anyway, testosterone levels, by the way, apparently, I guess there's a real, is he still talking here, or is this the real thing here? Testosterone levels in men have dropped in recent decades, and researchers are unsure why, but the drop is not 50%, and there is no indication that a drop in testosterone affects sexual orientation. Likewise, there is no evidence that estrogen in the water supply, which for birth control pills account for a statistically insignificant amount, by the way, affects sexual orientation. So the whole thing is garbage. One, there's no indication that a drop in testosterone does anything for sexual orientation. Other things, maybe, yes. Orientation, no. And likewise, birth control pills just not really responsible for any significant portion of whatever estrogen is in the water supply. And it likewise also doesn't appear by any research to do anything about sexual orientation. It's just not a hormonal thing, I guess, or at least not in the doses that they're talking about. I don't know whether you can, even if you were able to add more. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The claim that chemicals in tap water could turn people gay has gained ground with who? Dummies. Of course, conspiracy theorists over the years, most memorably with fringe commentator Alex Jones, who said chemicals in the water were, quote, turning the friggin' frogs gay. And, you can't have gay frogs hopping around all over the place. I don't know what would happen. I'm not really sure. But, no, I really have nothing. I think like Frogger, the video game, could turn gay, I suppose. That's possible. Would that change anything for me? I don't think so. Anyway, man, I don't know how you figure that out or why that would matter. But Alex Jones, so there's no explanation needed. In the same discussion, apparently, Perry called homosexuality shameful and linking it to disease. There are a lot of unhealthy effects of a homosexual lifestyle, said Perry. There are diseases, but it goes beyond that. There's a lot of them, and I can name one, and one of them isn't really necessarily actually causal and whatever. Perry has also said that LGBTQ people don't have a stake in the future because many do not have children, and he called gay people deviant, and the ones who do have children, of course, should shut up and go away, I assume, is in his view. In one discussion, he linked homosexuality to the fall of the Roman Empire. That's another fun trope. A fringe historical belief occasionally pushed by some Christian activists. But of course, he just told us that why do we have gay people now? We didn't used to, except in the Roman Empire, which is kind of in the past, actually, now that I think about it. But hey. Well, anyway, he's this sort of weirdo, and I don't even know whether it really bears any more discussion about just how strange he is when it comes to worrying about gay people or water turning you gay. However, there is also this. There's another comment here from him. It has boggled my mind that you have not seen a massive backlash from the black population for what is effectively a genocide, speaking here of abortion. And if you look to the right, you can see in the world that in world history there have been great killers. Holocaust, 11 million were killed, 6 million Jews. He's not denying that. That's interesting, said Perry, pointing to a chart comparing abortion to genocide. Perry and DeSantis did not respond to CNN's request for comment. So important that you know that, at least in the context of this discussion, he did not deny the existence of the Holocaust. He used it as a talking point. However, I would not be surprised if in the quote unquote right circumstances, he would also deny the Holocaust as well. If he felt like he was in front of an audience that was heavy on Holocaust denialism, I suppose he'd change his mind. But for the moment, he's speaking to people who he thinks believe that the Holocaust did in fact occur, which it did. So that's handy. And said, well, if you think that's bad, it's a form of Holocaust denialism in a way, I guess, if you think about it, right? This is the most horrible, terrible thing ever. But you know what? Actually, there's some other things that are very comparable to it. And so, I don't know, a little bit of a soft denialism, I would say, involved in that. Anyway, the rest of the article is backgrounder on DeSantis and Disney. So in case you had forgotten, Perry's appointment to the Oversight Board comes after a long-standing battle between DeSantis and Disney over the Paternal Rights in Education Act, which critics have called Florida's Don't Say Gay law. The law bars schools from teaching about sexual orientation and gender identity in kindergarten through third grade classrooms and in older classrooms that do not meet a yet-to-be-defined standard. After Disney's then chairman spoke out against the bill last year, DeSantis stripped the company of its unique governing power within the Reedy Creek Improvement District, the special taxing district created more than half a century ago that effectively gave the entertainment giant control of what has grown to 25,000 acres around its Orlando area theme parks. On Monday, and this was not today, but several weeks ago, DeSantis changed course. And then, or I guess this is, last Monday perhaps, and he signed a new bill that extended the life of the Reedy Creek Improvement District, but gave the governor new powers over its future. Was going to abolish it, I guess, but now he's keeping it around. The new law ousted the existing board, renamed it the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, and allowed DeSantis to appoint all 5 members, one of whom was Perry. This week, DeSantis told supporters that Disney's opposition to the bill was, quote, only a mild annoyance, and that the motivation for effectively punishing the company was in response to it allegedly injecting a lot of this sexuality into the programming for young kids. So he turned it and conflated it with this. Well, it's not that they oppose my bill. It's that they themselves are, in fact, indoctrinating, grooming pedophiles over at Disney. Yes. Well, that might not go over quite as well. But there are certainly enough lunatics willing to believe it for political purposes. He has suggested that the new board could influence Disney's business decisions by adding park discounts for Florida residents and even altering the company's entertainment offerings. I'm not really certain how they feel like they'll be able to do that. And by the way, why would you offer state-backed or DeSantis-backed discounts for Florida residents? Of course, that's something that Florida residents would, well, one, I think they already get. And two, they would say, hooray, free or low-cost access, low-cost, I assume, access to the Disney parks. But then you might stop and say, well, if they're a bunch of pedophile groomer predators, do we really want to be discounting this so that more Floridians are preyed upon by these horrible pedophile groomers? And the answer is, yeah, I guess so. So there you go. There's no policy on that side of the coin either, I guess. All right. Well, that's kind of weird. When you lose your way, you got to have people that are going to tell you the truth. And so we hope that they can get back on, whatever that means. DeSantis said, I guess, of the Disney execs. But I think all these board members very much would like to see the type of entertainment that all families can appreciate. That's, AI chatbot type discussion at this point. Historically, the Reedy Creek Board oversaw the fire department, water systems, roadways, and building inspections around the Disney's theme parks and could issue bonds and take on debt for long-term infrastructure programs. Democratic lawmakers in Florida who opposed DeSantis' takeover of the board warned that a politically motivated body could wield that power over Disney. Are we going to see board members vetoing projects that are considered to go against any governor? State Representative Rita Harris said during floor debate on the proposal. For instance, Walt Disney just changed Splash Mountain. Okay. They made it into Tiana's Bayou Adventure, I guess. So they changed the name of Splash Mountain, and I don't know anything about it, but maybe you do if you're a Disney fan. What if the governor didn't like that? And I think that there was some accusation of, quote unquote wokeism about it. I think there was, I don't remember Splash Mountain at all, but I guess it was themed after one or another of the older Disney movies. And my recollection, or from what I gathered of just reading about it peripherally, was, there are certain movies in the Disney archives there that are dated, let's say, in terms of their references to race or social status, etc. And we're reminded of Song of the South, I think, as the key exemplar of all this. And I don't know what Splash Mountain was based on, but it had some, I guess, referenced maybe to some of these outdated features, and so they renamed it and did it differently. And what if the governor doesn't like that? And who cares? I mean, really, honestly, it's none of your business. But what this Democratic lawmaker was saying, well, what if the governor doesn't like that? And would he be able to make the board then be able to push a company into changing their business model just so they didn't misalign with them? Possibly. In addition to Perry, DeSantis also appointed to the board one Martin Garcia, a Tampa lawyer whose private investment firm contributed $50,000 to the governor's 2022 reelection campaign, and Bridget Ziegler, a co-founder of the conservative organization Moms for Liberty, and the wife of Christian Ziegler, the new chairman of the Republican Party of Florida. So it's a connected bunch, and sounds like they're mostly a little bit like Chris Rufo, importing big time, relatively, I guess, big time conservative talk circuit type people, except for this Ron Perry, who seems to be even nuttier than most of them. But Moms for Liberty raising their head in this again, and we see that name come up all the time. All right, so now you're up to date on that one, probably more up to date on it than you ever wanted to be. And, we're almost back to break time again. And, that means I'll hold the long read for afterwards. But let's see. What else have we got here? Oh, why did I put this aside? I'm not certain how this got here. From the Hollywood Reporter. Oh, okay. Right. That there's an actual lawsuit now in place over the shocking news from the Fox Dominion lawsuit. And we mentioned that this, the revelations from this could spark a lawsuit, and I guess they have. Rupert Murdoch and Fox Corp sued for sharing Biden's presidential ads before they aired. And guess what? You'll never guess who is filing the suit. It turns out that the suit has been filed by Media Matters, claiming that Fox made an illegal contribution to Trump's Political Action Committee. That in-kind contribution fear that we were talking about, well, they're going to test that. Media Matters. How about that? That's not usually their role in this, is it? I don't know. More power to them, though. We'll find out. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Do you want to hear a little bit about this lawsuit? We ought to maybe put this on record and just let you know what's going on and give credit where credit is due. I'm reading it in the Hollywood Reporter, which is a little surprising to me. Probably a little bit surprising to Media Matters too, but of course, it involves Fox, and so I guess they're covering it as entertainment news. Winston Cho is the author of the piece, and it should be a pretty quick read, but a complaint has been filed against Fox Corporation and Rupert Murdoch over allegations that the network chief gave confidential information in 2020 to former President Donald Trump's campaign in a suit filed with the Federal Election Commission on Friday. So that's interesting. I guess it's not a lawsuit per se. Now that I'm reading this, they're not suing in court as plaintiff against defendant Fox Corporation and Rupert Murdoch, but rather they're filing probably a complaint of some kind with the FEC, which, that I think is probably a little bit more in the ballpark for Media Matters, I suppose. Anyway, they're claiming that Fox, of course, made illegal contributions to Trump's PAC when Murdoch shared then-candidate Joe Biden's campaign advertisements with Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. The liberal nonprofit seeks the maximum fine allowable for violations of campaign contribution laws and appropriate remedial action against Fox, Murdoch, and the Make America Great Again PAC for a nefarious attempt by people in power to operate a press entity as a political organization. That's interesting. A filing in Dominion Voting Systems defamation suit against Fox included claims, of course, about this, that Murdoch gave Kushner a preview of Biden's ads before they were public. The FEC Act prohibits campaign contributions from corporations, including direct or indirect gifts of money or services. The FEC considers information about advertising, messaging, and other campaign strategy a contribution, according to the complaint. While there are press exemptions for violations of the FEC Act, The suit alleges that Fox wasn't acting as a press entity. It stresses that the ads hadn't aired at the time Murdoch provided the information to Kushner, and that the ads were covertly shared to hide the alleged misconduct. This distribution is diametrically opposed to Fox Corporation's regular press activity, broadcasting news, programming through television and radio outlets and online publications, writes Angelo Carusone. Does he put the extra E at the end? Is he just say Carusone? A lawyer for Media Matters in the suit. Well, he's more than that. I mean, isn't he like head of Media Matters these days? Murdoch's secret conveyance of the Biden advertisements is even less like press activity than a cable casting company sending campaign flyers in its bills, and neither can be protected by the press exemption. Fox and the White House didn't immediately respond to requests for comment. Here it is. The actual complaint itself, as it says up at the header here, is this is before the Federal Election Commission, not a suit at law in Article 3 courts anywhere. So, okay, very interesting, but at least some legal repercussions beginning, and kudos to Media Matters for being the first one into the pool. Okay, so now I thought I'd share this with you as perhaps a long read that may take up the segment. I'm not certain how long it's going to take to get through this, but it's certainly a topic you could talk about forever. And here's how we got to it, because the article I'm going to read is from a couple of years ago. Why is it being discussed now? And my answer for you is the mastodon toot that I saw this morning from everybody's good friend, Greg Green, who, if you're not following him, do consider doing so. Longtime denizen of the Netroots, formerly, I don't think he still works for, but certainly has a long experience working for the Democratic Party political organizations. DCCC, I think, is where he was. But I'm not positive of that offhand now that I think about it. But at any rate, Greg often making astute observations of all sorts on all kinds of political activity. How does he describe himself? Let's see, in his bio. Let's see, is he now currently with the Planned Parenthood Action Fund? Is that what we're reading here? Prior employment with the DNC, the National Democratic Institute, etc. But at any rate, his own read on the current Republican and MAGA proclivity for, I guess this grows out of weekend CPAC activity. Here's how we'll start. He's quoting Matt Walsh and his tweet over the weekend, which reads, Walsh was one of many who spent the weekend, I think partially motivated by CPAC, making LGBTQ accusations and I don't know, basically laying down abusive and eliminationist rhetoric. As I recall, it was somebody else who also was widely being correctly bashed for trying to be too clever by half, and saying that we should, using all sorts of explicit eliminationist rhetoric about we need to, what did they say, eliminate transgenderism from public life, to wipe out transgenderism from public life. And then when people said this is eliminationist rhetoric, how dare you, he said, no, I didn't say transgender people, I said transgenderism, which is somehow supposedly different. And I think it was it Radley Balka who was saying, sure, that works just fine. Just substitute Jewish and Judaism. I didn't say we should eliminate Jews from public life. I said eliminate Judaism. You see, you can't hold me responsible for that. Well, it's pretty obvious and transparent when you swap out the words exactly what's going on here. But so Greg, I think, taking a similar tack, but with a different comment. This one, as I said, from Matt Walsh. He's explaining his anti-LGBTQ bias this way. We were minding our own business when suddenly this trans movement comes along and demanded that we totally abandon biology, common sense, and truth itself for its sake. Our war against this scourge is a defensive struggle. They started it. They wanted this fight. Now they have it. That's how he views these things. And Greg, responding to this, saying, look, as a personal rule of thumb, when I can read big time SAT words here, when I can read is it Jeremiah? Okay. Replace its target with civil rights movement or emancipation movement, or as Radley did, Jews and Judaism, right? And you can get results that echo the words of reactionaries from the 50s, the 1950s, or the 1850s for that matter. I'm inclined to view whoever's talking as the same sort of villain, right? So instead of saying we were minding our own business when suddenly this trans movement came along, if you can say, we were minding our own business when suddenly the civil rights movement came along and demanded that we totally abandon biology, common sense, and truth itself for its sake. I mean, biology, right? Didn't they just basically say at the time, both in the 1850s and the 1950s, there are differences. Look, the skin is just one of many, but white people can do this, white people can't do that. Black people can do this, black people can't do that. There are physical differences, and they were just sure that they had the science right. They had the science wrong, but they were sure they had the science right. And a point well taken. And as a matter of fact, here's how well taken it is. Somebody has actually done this academic work, and he provides it for us as a 2019 Washington Post essay proposed. He just, he presents us with the essay itself, and rather than call out the good part, let's give the full context and read this piece, because I thought it was really pretty revealing. Let's jump back to Pocket and get it. And this is a piece called The, quote, Reasonable Rebels. And it's illustrated with a picture very clearly talking about, when we're talking about rebels, we're talking about Civil War types. The reasonable rebels. Conservatives say we've abandoned reason and civility. The Old South used to use the same language to defend slavery. I added an extra couple of words in there, but the Old South used the same language to defend slavery. Did you know this? Eve Fairbanks is the writer of this August 29th, 2019 piece. And it ought to be rerun, as is really what Greg is suggesting. So ready for this one? After the El Paso shooting, right? We're taking ourselves back. This is now written in August 2019. After the El Paso shooting, Ben Shapiro, a popular conservative broadcaster, more or less, asked Americans to draw a line between the few conservatives who are white supremacists, few, and those who, like him, aren't. Almost all Americans, quote, are on the same side, he said, and we should be mourning together. In his telling, we aren't. For one simple reason, too many, he says, on the political left are castigating the character of those who disagree, lumping conservatives and political nonconformists together with racists and xenophobes. Well, I grew up in a conservative family, Eve Fairbanks writes. The people I talk to most frequently, the people I call when I need help, are conservative. I'm not inclined to paint conservatives as thoughtless bigots. But a few years ago, listening to the voices and arguments of commentators like Shapiro, I began to feel a very specific déjà vu that I couldn't initially identify. It felt as if the arguments I was reading were eerily familiar. I found myself Googling lines from articles, especially when I read the rhetoric of a group of people we would call the, quote, reasonable right. And take this, by the way, in context with what Greg was describing about the three different camps of conservative voters, right? Okay, well, this is the reasonable right. Not all these figures identify as right-wing. They typically dislike President Trump, but say they're being pushed rightward or driven to defend the rights of conservatives by intolerance and extremism on the left. The reasonable right includes people like Shapiro, which he's really not, and the radio commentator Dave Rubin, legal scholar Amy Wax, and Jordan Peterson, the Canadian academic who warns about identity politics and is a misogynist. The social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, who I don't know, the New York Times columnist Barry Weiss, whom we do, and the American Enterprise Institute scholar Christina Hoff Sommers, self-described feminists who decry excesses in the feminist movement. The novelist Bret Easton Ellis, I don't know why anyone's listening to him, and the podcaster Sam Harris, who believe that important subjects have needlessly been excluded from political discussions. They present their concern as, principally, freedom of speech and diversity of thought. Remember when they were all going to get together and found the University of Austin? That really went places. Weiss has called them renegade ideological explorers who venture into dangerous territory despite the outrage and derision directed their way by haughty social gatekeepers. So it felt frustrating. When I read Weiss, when I listened to Shapiro, I don't know why you were doing it, but you did. When I watched Peterson or read the supposedly heterodox online magazine Quillette, what was I reminded of? My childhood home is just a half-hour drive from the Manassas battlefield in Virginia, and I grew up intensely fascinated by the Civil War. I loved perusing soldiers' diaries. During my senior year in college, I studied almost nothing but Abraham Lincoln's speeches, and I wrote my thesis on a key Lincoln address. Civil War rhetoric was almost all I read. Not just that of the 16th president, but also that of his adversaries, or adversaries, if you prefer to say it that way. Thinking back on those debates, I finally figured it out. The reasonable rights rhetoric is exactly the same as the antebellum rhetoric I'd read so much of. The same exact words, the same exact arguments. Rhetoric, to be precise, in support of the slave-owning South. If that sounds absurd, after all, Shapiro and his compatriots aren't defending slavery, it may be because many Americans are unfamiliar with the South's actual rhetoric. I know I am. I don't think I read it as much as she did. Anyway, when I was a kid in public school, she says, I learned the arguments of Senator John C. Calhoun, Democrat then, of South Carolina, who called slavery a, quote, positive good, and Alexander Stephens, the Confederacy's vice president, who declared that the South's ideological cornerstone rested, quote, upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, unquote. But such clear statements were not the norm. Pro-slavery rhetoricians talked little of slavery itself. Instead, they anointed themselves the defenders of reason, free speech, and civility, because that was such a civil institution, slavery. The prevalent line of argument in the antebellum South rested on the supposition that Southerners were simultaneously the keepers of an ancient faith and renegades, made martyrs by their dedication to facts, reason, and civil discourse by whipping people. It might sound strange that America's pro-slavery faction styled itself the guardian of freedom and minority rights. And yet it did. In a deep study of antebellum Southern rhetoric, Patricia Roberts Miller, a professor of rhetoric at the University of Texas at Austin, easy to find them for the folks at the University of Austin, just cross town presumably, do it by Zoom because most of the faculty of University of Austin, A, don't exist, and B, aren't in Austin, but and it's not a real thing. Anyway, Professor Patricia Roberts Miller, who is a real professor in Austin, characterizes the story that pro-slavery writers wanted to tell between the 1830s and the 1860s as not one of demanding more power, but of David resisting Goliath, They stressed the importance of logic and then, quote, facts, quote, truth, quote, science, and, quote, nature, much more than Northern rhetoricians did. I guess there's no extra T in that. I want to say rhetoricians, but it's rhetoricians? All right. All right. I think we got it about as close as we can get. They chided their adversaries for being romantic idealists, ignoring the, quote, experience of centuries. Josiah Nott, N-O-T-T, a surgeon who laid out the purported science behind black inferiority, which would be crucial for the defense of slavery, I guess, held that questions like slavery, quote, should be left open to fair and honest investigation and made to stand or fall according to the facts, unquote. They claimed that they were the ones who truly had black people's best interests at heart, thanks to their more realistic understanding of human biology. And here a quote from John Wilkes Booth. Ready? No one would be willing to do more for the Negro race than I, John Wilkes Booth wrote shortly before he assassinated Lincoln. He alleged that any pragmatist could see that freeing black people into a cold, cruel world would actually cause their, quote, annihilation. Slavery, another Southern thinker argued, was natural because if whites could work in the sweltering South Carolina rice fields, they would. The constitutions, as he says, it's quote, the quote, constitutions of black men, on the other hand, were, quote, perfectly adapted until they died from the sweltering heat and you bought another one. But they're perfectly adapted, as you can see. Thinking about that in the current context of LGBTQ, transgender issues, etc. Well, we're the ones who understand biology. You guys are the ones fantasizing about biology being different or gender being a construct. We are the ones who have the real, true understanding of the science of things, and you can't shut us out of the debate. That's outrageous. But, understandings of biology apparently change because here's people saying, well, no, biologically, they're just different. And so therefore they're supposed to be slaves. And we'd be doing the work if we could, but we can't biologically. Well, back to the article here. They loved hyperbole. Events were, quote, the most extraordinary spectacles that they had, quote, ever challenged the notice of the civilized world. Too alarming and threatened, quote, to destroy all that is valuable and beautiful in the institutions of our country. How beautiful that one was. All over, they saw slippery slopes. Objecting to the extension of slavery into new territories, Lincoln's longtime position would lead inexorably to miscegenation. The most important thing to know about them, they held, was that they were not the oppressors, the slave owners, no. They were the oppressed. They were driven to feelings of isolation and shame purely on the basis of freely held ideas. The right of every thinking man. It's just that the ideas were backwards and upside down. I should own people. I can enslave them. It's okay for me to take a boat and go to another country and kidnap the people there and make them my slaves by hauling them over to this country where they can't escape and whether based on race or not, which, by the way, eventually it was. And for the greater part of the 400 years it was. They weren't sailing to Slavic lands and capturing their slaves there. And, hey, if it was good enough for the Vikings and the Russians, the Nordic Rus, or whatever the hell they called themselves back in the day, then it should be good enough for us. But, well, strangely, they found a racial basis for it instead. Anyway, the point is that at one point they held this as the real truth of history and biology, And I don't know. At some point, that was no longer the prevailing sentiment, but they refused to acknowledge that. And the idea that they were being told that, hey, this could actually be wrong was like, well, no, now you're just telling me that I'm not allowed to have freely held ideas anymore. All right. So again, they weren't the oppressors. They were the oppressed, driven to feelings of isolation and shame purely on the basis of freely held ideas, the right of every thinking man. Representative Alexander Sims of South Carolina, a Democrat, yes, claimed that America's real problem was the way Southerners were made to suffer under, quote, the sneers and fanatic ebullitions, is that right? Ebullitions of ignorant and wicked pretenders to philanthropy. Booth's complaint before he shot Lincoln wasn't that he could no longer practice slavery, something he'd never done anyway. Instead, he lamented that he no longer felt comfortable expressing, quote, my thoughts or sentiments, unquote, on slavery freely in good company. In other words, they made slavers ashamed again. And then he was angry that he was being excluded from good society because he kept insisting on the propriety of being a slaver, which he wasn't. Which is interesting all by itself, but that's a pretty astonishing comparison to what's going on now. Let's call this particular logic antebellum reasoning. Its appeal was that it identified pro-South rhetoricians as the upholders of America's true heritage. They were, in their own reckoning, dedicated to truth and persecuted by tyrants. Just as the early Americans found a sense of pride and worth in England's inability to endure their dissent, so antebellum Southerners located their virtue in the passions set against them. All of this is there in the reasonable right. The claim that they are the little people struggling against prevailing winds. The argument that they're the ones championing reason and common sense. The allegation that their interlocutors aren't so much wrong as excessive. They're just trying to think freely and are being tormented. The reliance on hyperbole and slippery slopes to warn about their adversaries' intentions and power. The depiction of their opponents as an orthodoxy, an epithet the antebellum South loved. In Dave Rubin, who says that, quote, if you have any spark of individualism in you, if you have anything about you that's interesting or different, they, the left, will come to destroy that, which is, of course, typically what the left is celebrating, but hey. Anyway, I hear the pro-Southern newspaper editor Duff Green. Abolitionists' intent is, quote, to drive the white man from the South, unquote. I don't think so. In Barry Weiss, who asserts that the boundaries of public discourse have become so prescribed as to make impossible frank discussions of anything remotely controversial, and that perfectly reasonable intellectuals are being regularly mislabeled with every career-ending epithet, I hear Josiah Nott. Scientific men who have been bold enough to speak truth have been persecuted. In Ben Shapiro, who ascribes right-wing anger to unwise left-wing provocation, how do you think people are going to react? He often says. I hear a letter printed in the Charleston Mercury, which warned that, quote, if the mad career of the hot-headed abolitionists should lead to acts of violence on the part of those whom they so vindictively assail, who shall be accountable? Not the South. In Bret Easton Ellis, who complains that the left is, quote, always unreasonably, quote, angry about things, serves him, quote, the constant reminders of my failings, and expects total silence and submission. I hear the pro-slavery U.S. Telegraph, which warned that abolitionists plotted a, quote, disruption of that fraternity of feeling in America. Is there truth to these complaints, such as the one from Amy Wax, that America's cultural cohesion gets no attention, no discussion, as she recently complained to the New Yorker. Are the boundaries of public discourse in America really so proscribed that no opinion outside of left-wing orthodoxy can be spoken? Of course not. Over the past 10 years, Fox News has outstripped CNN as America's most watched cable news network. On the day Special Counsel Robert Mueller released his report on Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election, Fox News' online articles racked up more reactions and shares on Facebook than all the stories by CBS, ABC, and NPR combined. Conservatives control the presidency, the Senate, and the Supreme Court. Is it true that it's career ending to be of the reasonable right? Shapiro's recent Right Side of History was a New York Times #1 bestseller, and he's not gone yet, by the way. Rubin's YouTube channel has more than 1 million subscribers, and last year he was the subject of an admiring 4,000-word profile in Playboy. Peterson bragged that scalpers were charging more for a sold-out performance of his than tickets to a Toronto Maple Leafs playoffs game. A conservative I'm close to routinely emails political commentaries of her own. She's delighted when I post them on my Facebook page for discussion, but she insists that I conceal her name. When I ask why, she points to herself and says, Marano, the word for the Jewish minority who were viciously persecuted under King Ferdinand of Spain. But a Republican is the king, I say, baffled. She doesn't want to hear it. She'll just point to herself again and repeat, Marano. It's an identity that's important to her. Well, we're only about 3/4 of the way through the piece, but as you can see, it's, I think, very valuable, great history lesson, a great reminder that history repeats itself, and a great context for which we should have available and keep available for considering their weird anti-LGBTQ feud.
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, time now for Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, of course, coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. The GOP Oversight Committee chair, we're going to find out, is leaning hard into far-right conspiracies. I think we all predicted that was going to happen. What else have we got? Well, news from the EPA and a state's report on cybersecurity threats. All next.